Ever heard of a tradition that promoted extreme torture, permanent deformity, and excruciating pain in the name of beauty? Today, we will talk about a tradition born in ancient China, where millions of Chinese women practiced it and paid a painful price beyond our imagination. Our story will shed light on the horrible practice of foot binding. Foot binding, also known as the lotus feet, is a practice that originated in ancient China. With exact details missing, some evidence shows that the tradition has existed for a long time. The historic accounts indicate its significant popularity during the Southern Song dynasty in the 10th century. Foot binding was practiced because it was considered a sign of beauty, refinement, and social status. The practice continued until the People's Republic of China was formed in the 20th century. Several theories float around regarding its origins. One theory suggests that the foot binding practice started among the courtesans in the royal court who bound their feet to be more graceful and delicate in their appearance. Another theory is that once there was a beautiful girl named Pan Yunu. She was the companion of the southern Qi emperor Xiao Baozhuan. Pan was known for her delicate feet in the kingdom. She used to dance barefoot on the floor, beautifully covered in the design of a golden lotus. While expressing his admiration, Emperor Xiao said, "Lotus springs from her every step." This is one of the reasons why foot binding also came to be known as golden lotus. Women with bound feet were considered more marriageable, as small feet were an essential characteristic of an ideal wife. If you think this practice was all about beauty and grace, you're about to unfold the painful procedure behind it. Girls were usually introduced to the foot binding process around age 5 to 8. It continued until their early teens or even longer. Despite its painful nature, foot binding was considered a mark of beauty and elegance in Chinese society. The foot binding process commenced by selecting an auspicious day according to the calendar. Prayers and offerings were made to the tiny-footed maiden goddess and Guan Yin, a Buddhist figure believed to protect women. Skilled older women of the family or professional foot binders performed the task. The toes, except the big toe, were bent under the foot and long strips of cloth tightly bound the feet, creating a pronounced arch. This binding was done for a month, followed by unbinding, treating skin ulcers and rebinding. Monthly adjustments were made to the bindings until the girl reached her early teens, depending on the desired outcome. The bindings resulted in excruciating pain and forced the foot to take on a distinctive curved shape. Over time, the foot became deformed, and the woman's walking ability was severely impaired. The goal was to achieve feet of 3 to 4 inches, known as golden lotus or lotus feet, named after the symbol of life in Buddhism. Smaller feet were deemed more attractive and elegant, with some considering them erotic. The practice became a distinctive mark of femininity and grace. Women with bound feet adopted a unique walking style with small, light steps. Despite the belief that foot binding will help find a suitable groom, its impact on women's health was severe. The vicious ritual created various health problems for women, such as infection. Despite efforts to trim toenails regularly, ingrown nails were frequent, leading to infections and injuries. In some cases, toenails were even peeled back or removed completely. The foot binding practice disturbed the blood circulation, particularly to the toes, making it difficult for injuries to heal and resulting in infected toes and decaying flesh. The rotted flesh emitted an unpleasant odor, and the folds of the feet became breeding grounds for microorganisms. Women who underwent treatment for this ritual experienced limited mobility and were prone to disability. If infections spread to the bones, they could weaken and cause toes to drop off. Strangely, this was sometimes seen as a positive effect because it allowed for even tighter binding. In extreme cases, glass shards or broken tiles were deliberately inserted into the bindings to cause injury and infection. Inevitably, diseases followed infections, and septic shock could lead to death. Survivors of foot binding faced increased risks of medical problems as they grew older, with estimates suggesting that up to 10% of girls may have died from gangrene and other such infections. Initially, foot binding involved breaking many bones that remained broken for years. However, as the girls grew older, the bones gradually healed. Even after healing, the bones were prone to repeated fractures, especially during the teenage years when the feet were still developing. To achieve smaller and more desirable feet, toes were deliberately broken multiple times. Older women were more susceptible to hip fractures and other bone injuries due to the fluctuation of their feet, making it more challenging to maintain balance or stand up from a seated position. The practice also led to paralysis, muscular atrophy, and altered posture. By the early 20th century, the damaging effects of foot binding were exposed through photographs, X-rays, and detailed accounts. Scientific investigations highlighted how foot binding deformed the legs, caused cracked skin ulcers, and affected overall posture. But did it put a full stop to this sick practice in the name of tradition? As societal attitudes and political dynamics started to shift in the early 20th century, a decline of this painful ritual began, leading to its eventual eradication. However, the seed of resistance started to sow in the 19th century. During the mid-19th century, the leaders of the Taiping Rebellion were primarily Hakka men. Interestingly, the women from the Hakka community did not engage in foot binding. In the areas under their control, the rebellion leaders even went as far as banning foot binding altogether. However, their efforts didn't meet with success. During this time, Christian missionaries stepped in. These missionaries believed that this was a cruel and detrimental practice for women. Through education, pamphlets, and lobbying the Qing court, they worked diligently to change the opinions of the elite. One of their key arguments was that no other culture practiced such a custom. These efforts gradually influenced the perception of foot binding among the upper class. The earliest Western group against foot binding was formed in 1874. Around 60 to 70 Christian women in Xiamen attended a meeting led by missionary John McGowan and created the Natural Foot Society, also known as the Heavenly Foot Society. McGowan believed this practice seriously caused harm to the Chinese civilization, seeing it as a disturbance of divine nature. Members of the Heavenly Foot Society pledged not to bind their daughters' feet. In 1895, Christian women in Shanghai, led by Alicia Little, also established a Natural Foot Society. This cause was supported by the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, founded in 1883. The movement was promoted by missionaries like Timothy Richard, who believed Christianity could promote gender equality. The missionary-led opposition had a greater impact than the previous opposition. Western missionaries set up the first girls' schools and encouraged women to abandon the practice. The missionaries openly expressed shock and disgust when explaining foot binding to their peers back home, leaving their audience astonished by their descriptions. Back in China in the 19th century, a group of progressive thinkers recognized that foot binding was a cultural practice that needed eradication. Led by Kang Youwei, the Anti-Foot Binding Society was established near Canton in 1883, and similar societies emerged throughout the country. The movement gained significant momentum, boasting a membership of 300,000 individuals. Interestingly, the focus of the anti-foot binding movement was primarily pragmatic and patriotic rather than feminist. Supporters argued that, by abolishing the foot binding practice, China would experience improved health and enhanced productivity. Kang Youwei, in a petition to the throne, emphasized that China had become an object of mockery among foreigners. Social reformers like Liang Qichao believed that social Darwinism weakened the nation. They argued that when women were dehydrated, they would give birth to weak sons, further contributing to the national weakness. Liang Qichao emphasized the crucial role of education for women in addressing this issue. In his work on women's education, he asserted that the lack of women's education was the root cause of national weakness. According to Qichao, foot binding was closely linked to the hindered progress of women's education. Furthermore, Qichao expressed disappointment that foreigners were opening the first schools, as he believed that the Chinese should take the lead in educating Chinese women. In 1906, Zhao Ziqian wrote in the Beijing Women's News, blaming women with bound feet for being perceived as a national weakness by other nations. Anti-foot binding groups gained momentum, with many members pledging not to bind their daughters' feet and refusing to let their sons marry women with bound feet. In 1912, the Republic of China's government took a significant step by officially banning the ancient practice of foot binding. While the ban initially faced challenges, it symbolized the forward-thinking perspective of prominent intellectuals. These intellectuals were associated with the May 4th movement, which recognized foot binding as a poignant symbol of China's archaic traditions. Despite initial difficulties, the prohibition gained momentum in various provinces. Visionary leaders like Yan Xishan actively campaigned against foot binding, appointing foot inspectors and imposing fines on those who persisted with the practice. The regional governments also enforced the ban, further contributing to its success. The results were remarkable. A survey conducted in 1929 in one province revealed that among girls born before 1910, merely a handful had unbound feet, whereas the majority born after that year were free from foot-binding constraints. In Dingxian, located south of Beijing, which had previously seen over half of their women with bound feet, no new cases were observed among those born after 1919. It was a new dawn for Chinese women. The history of foot-binding in China reveals the horrifying physical and psychological impact on generations of women. Once a widely accepted practice, a symbol of beauty and social status, it also became the reason for immense suffering and debilitation. The legacy of foot-binding serves as a reminder of the power of cultural evolution and the eradication of harmful practices for the betterment of humanity. So, what do you think of this painstaking tradition? Given the power, what would you do differently for Chinese women to reduce their pain? Write your thoughts in the comment section and subscribe to our channel for more engaging stories from the past.